Well, it goes without saying, this is all about Raedene. And those of you who are used to seeing in my doctor suit might be surprised to see me in my bishop suit. But while I'm to talk about Raedene, I also want to talk about Raedene's group. And she had more than one group. And so I've come today to kind of represent both groups and to let them know they're married, if you will. And what Raedene and I talked about many times, I think this is supposed to be reflections, was how that on a soul level, people travel in groups. And the purpose of the group is to serve the world. Some members of the group know that they're serving, and some serve without knowing. When I first met Raedene, it was interesting to find that we both were products of two of the most conservative theological institutes in the United States of America. She from Wheaton College and me from Bob Jones University. And as we talked, we realized that we had received magnificent training from those institutions for the job we had to do. And as we talked about my training, her training in med school, mine in chiropractic school, we realized that we had been very well prepared. While we wondered how we were going to do the job, we knew we were prepared. And as we worked together, her mother introduced Raedene to me, and I knew her for years as a patient before she became a student and colleague. But one of the things we talked about was the scriptures tell us that no man hath seen God at any time. In reality, the only way we have to see God, as you described, we see God in one another. Humans sort of lack the receiver to really nail down who God is. And yet, as we began to work together for the development of energy medicine, and as we worked together, me as the founder of our association for the advancement of energy medicine, and Raedene as the president of her institute and also as a board member of our association throughout our entire life. Once she had begun, she never laid down the gauntlet. We both, when we would reflect together, and we weren't always together, sometimes months would go between times that we'd talk. And it was always interesting, the meld that was there, that we were being led by the same Spirit and coming to the same conclusions. My theological background makes me want to just quote you all kinds of verses and tell you all the places in the Bible I see all this is true. But I'm just going to stick with the spirit of the thing, because that's really what Raedene was about. Raedene's mother, Catherine and Ray, came to me in Rapid City as clients. And Catherine had a little business. She was interested in energy healing, and she had a nutrition business. And she would do testings of people's, now once in a while I'm going to lapse into doctorese, and you're going to have to forgive me because I'm going to mention urine. And Raedene's mother would check people's urine and determine their pH, and then she would give them nutrition. And she was very enthusiastic about her work, as you know, very enthusiastic. But when she met me, and it's not me that impressed her, it was the work. She could see there was such a power there that she just dropped everything and sent everybody to see that guy up in Rapid City. And she actually worked for me as a orienteer, if you will. When somebody would come in and I was doing things that were so different that I couldn't take time to explain the new things we were developing. And so Catherine would explain. And then she introduced Raedene, and I was so impressed with her. And what started happening, the thing that keyed to Raedene and Catherine into some of the unusual healings that we began to see. And I'm going to give you one example because I think it's really interesting. And I'm going to mention that word again. But Ray was at an advanced stage of ill health with Parkinson's. And Catherine called me one day and she said, well, Ray's in a coma. The doctor says he's going to pass. And I don't know why she said this, but she said, if you want to see him before he goes, why don't you come down? And I had a student at the time that was from my teacher. I was to mentor him for my teacher. And he was a pharmacist. And every once in a while when we'd work, he'd say to me, this stuff we're doing is really crazy. And so I put my student in the plane, and we flew down to see Ray, and sure enough, there he lay, unconscious, catheterized, doing the thing that's so obvious that we see. And Catherine said, well, is there anything you might like to check on him? Maybe you could learn something by just doing some of your stuff. So I did some of my stuff. And I know I didn't know very much yet because of what I found. I found that Ray had some kidney stones stuck in his ureter. Excuse me, if that's too gross for you, but that's what I found. And so the old rule we have at our institute is you fix what you find. So we did a reparative procedure to cause that to dilate and allow the stone to pass. I sat down awkwardly. No change occurred. And I sat down awkwardly, was talking to Catherine. And after about 15 minutes, 5 smooth stones came, reminded of David. 5 smooth stones came trickling down that catheter. Plop, 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 plop. Okay. But the amazing thing is that Ray woke up. And he had 2 more years to live. And during that period of time, he and Catherine worked out so many things that was a part of their marriage that they wanted to work out. And it was blessed. The only other example, I won't give you graphic examples, we began to notice tremendous changes in people that exceeded anything that our medical training or our spiritual training could anticipate. And we were just in awe. And each day after we'd studied together, and I was teaching her technique, and then we would talk about the ramifications. And I have to jump ahead 3 decades and say that we both agree that one of the most profound things that we see is that children who are born of women who have had the work that we do are different from their parents. They do not have the same DNA problems that usually are so profoundly inherited. And she and I have been at this so long that we can say, we saw it, we've seen it. And it's interesting. Well, enough of that. There came a time when our teacher, the one who initiated the work that we were doing, was no longer available. And Raedene and I talked about this. Now it's no longer student and teacher, it was colleague. And as we were colleagues, we were, what are we going to do? And we noticed that the nurses didn't really care much about learning what we were doing because they were busy doing what they were doing. I noticed the chiropractors were not interested in learning what we were doing because they were busy popping bones and filling out insurance forms. And we just didn't know what to do. And we really prayed about it. We thought about it. And out of the so-called clear blue sky, there came a couple of people to me and several to Raedene that said, we want to learn this work. And they didn't have any credentials like we were looking for. They had credentials like being massage therapists or Reiki healers or whatever. And one of the prospective students said, we're going to get this one way or another, you better teach us. So that's what we did. And what we did, we built our own peer group. And at that point, we did not realize really consciously how much people are traveling in a group that has a purpose. At this point, both she and I kind of look at a person and just know, oops, there's a member of my family, there's a member of my group. All of us are brothers and sisters in God. But here is a person uniquely dedicated in one way or another to what we're trying to do. I just hope and pray I'm communicating. This is one of the most important presentations I've ever made because I want you to know how profound this is. And as we began to grow, we actually grew our peer group and we grew our association, and they're pretty strong now. We've got quite a lot. And we saw that we wanted every graduate and every student and every client and every patient to enjoy the energy work we were doing in such a way that they could be the very best person they could be. And what was interesting, we were attracting people that really didn't seem to belong in our group. But if they were a whatever, I'd hesitate to name any names of any groups, but we had them all, and they all got the same response. They all had the same changes, and I think that's one of the proofs of scientific validity, that it's repeatable. If we would teach a student something, the student could do the same thing Raedene did. They could do the same thing I did. And Raedene probably hasn't told you much of that, but it was really profound. But Raedene constantly said to me, I don't really care how successful they are making money or how big a practice they have. I just want them to be the best they can. I want them to grow and I want them to learn. Now, Steve told me not to get all esoteric on you, but I got to do it just a little. What I did already was probably bad enough. But we had a fella that Raedene and Judith were responsible in bringing to one of our conferences by the name of Stuart Green. And he's a physicist. And Stephen was really interested in him because he talked about unification theory, and he talked about Newtonian physics and about quantum physics. And the first time Steve said quantum to me, I said, huh? And as we began to understand what quantum physics was, we realized it was what we were doing. But one of the things that Stuart said was something about the real unification is love. And Raedene said, yeah. And I said, yeah. The real thing, in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, we're told there are going to be languages and there are going to be signs and there are going to be this. But the only thing that will prevail in the final analysis is love. We see now through a glass darkly. There's no way we can really understand the depths. We just work and follow the breadcrumbs, so to speak, of what we've been shown. And I'm going to tell you this, and it's something that was so profound, and it had to do with my interaction with Raedene, and never in the last 35 years have I ever made any major decision or any major change of any type Nobody knows this except my spouse, her spouse, my spouse. That I always consulted with Raedene. We always made decisions together. And I had gone through a really difficult time. And I was driving down the highway, a place I'd driven many times before. But you know, when you're in pain, sometimes the shades open up. And suddenly I just looked about me and I could see how beautiful the creation was. And I realized I was a part of it. I was one with it. And as Raedene and I worked with our work, we would come to the same conclusion. And the conclusion was that we're hearing another melody. We're walking to a different drummer. I'm not sad that Raedene has gone. I'm so profoundly touched. Whenever she said something to me, I listened. Whenever I said something to her, she listened. And if there was ever any kind of a disagreement, I can only remember one small detail, and we decided, both of us, well, it's some of each. So often without earthly contact, again, I'd mentioned that we found a meld. We wanted our group to be filled with love and to work and to help people and to help the human race. And we realized that our students and graduates and the other members of our group were at all different levels and abilities and appreciations and understandings. And you said Raedene was salty. I won't say what she said, but she said, well, I really just don't care about that. You could maybe imagine what she said. I just want them to love and live and grow. Now, I'm going to close with two dreams. And one of my teachers told me years ago, she was Southern, she said, Bernie, when you got a subject, you fill your aura with your subject, and you wind yourself up, and you let yourself go. And my first draft had like 28 points on one page and 28 points on the next. And the main thing is today I wanted to wind myself up and let myself go to give you an impression. And I hope I'm able to get through the first one because it's a dream Steve told me about just this week. He said he was, paraphrasing, I can't get it exactly, he was walking down a street, there was an empty place between two buildings. He looked in there and there was a hole. He looked in the hole and there was Raedene. And he wanted to get Raedene out of that hole. And he was just pulling and working, getting Raedene out of that hole. And he realized it was a grave. And he got her out and he looked and she was still in there. And then he woke up and he just, I said, well, tell you, fella, I think that was a message from Raedene. She's not in there anymore. She has moved on, and happy trails is the story. But she's still with us. Every time I make a major decision for the rest of my life, I'm going to consult with Raedene. And as our consciousness expands, we can hear answers and we can make conversation. Now, I was told never to say I'm closing and then go on, but I told you I was going to close with two dreams, so now you got to get the second one. And this dream was, I heard my teacher, Carol Parrish, Dr. Carol Parrish, was telling a dream she had that she died and passed over, and she found herself at a great crystal cathedral. And I envisioned in my mind, and she said, yeah, a little bit like that one in California. What was that fellow's name? Schindler? Yeah, Schuler. And she had a little like that, big, shiny cathedral. But it was some steps up. And at the top, there was an obscure being that she knew. The being wasn't obscure, but the vision of her ability to see the being was obscured because it was just too awesome. And the voice said, "Come forward." And so she came forward. And here comes the punchline. The voice said, "Take a step up. Come here." She took a step up, and she heard. And she turned around, and every single person she'd ever helped, every single person that had ever helped her, every single person that was a part of her group had taken a step forward at exactly the same time. Now that's what's happened. Our sister has taken a step forward to the greater life. And I know what she wants. She wants us right with her.